In this video, I'm going to tell you who I think the real top boy is between the characters of this amazing drama between Ashley Walters, who plays Dushane Hill, Kane Robinson, who plays Gerard John Sullivan, otherwise known as Sully, Michael Ward, who plays Jamie Terrell, and Jasmine Dobson.
I can't really read my own handwriting.
And Jasmine Dobson, who plays Jack Lawrence. So for those of you who have maybe been living under a rock or you're not in the UK and you've not heard of Top Boy, it was a drama started on Channel 4 back in 2011, which ended 32 episodes and 5 seasons later on Netflix. So this was a drama about a gang of East London drug dealers based in a mythical estate called Summer House, based in Hackney. And it tells the story of the top boy, Dushane, who struggled to maintain his empire, dealing with all of the ups and downs of criminal life. Now, as an entrepreneur and leader, there are loads of analogies that we often draw between things like war and crime. There are many elements to both which are synonymous with business and enterprise, such as leadership, teamwork. There is often a product, there's a customer, there are stakeholders, and there's stress. So what I've done is I've looked at 4 characteristics that I think is important in leadership, and I have scored each one of these characters. So that is Dushane, Sully, Jamie, and Jack against these characteristics, so I can tell you who I think the real top boy is. Now, the first characteristic is vision. So if we think of Dushane, played by Ashley Walters, who seems to be the top boy, he really is the one that set up the entire operation and had the vision for this criminal enterprise. So in this regard, we'll give him 5 marks out of 5 for vision, for being that entrepreneur who has come up with a new idea based on an opportunity that he's seen in the market. Moving on to Sully, who has always struggled being the number 1 to Dushane, who throughout each season becomes increasingly frustrated by his position, has never really exercised much vision as a character. You could argue in the last season of Top Boy, where Sully becomes extremely aggravated by the lack of respect that he feels he's getting from Dushane, has the vision that he should now become the top boy. But really, that was really motivated by his frustration and not from a real kernel of vision. But that idea was really motivated by a frustration in Dushane and not a larger vision that Sully could express. So for that reason, when it comes to vision, we'll give Sully a 2 out of 5. Jamie Terrell, played by Michael Ward, was an exceptional character which everyone loved and enjoyed. In terms of vision, Jamie was the rival gang to Sully and Dushane, who were the young whippersnappers trying to move in on their turf. So in terms of vision, being in that environment, I would give Jamie a 4 out of 5, only because this isn't the type of environment that you would come into without expecting extreme conflict. But him having the vision that perhaps he could run things shows that he has the courage to see through an idea. And the 4th character, Jack Lawrence, played by Jamie Dobson, doesn't really have much vision throughout. She's more like a captain in the army, and she looks after many of the youngers who are on the front line and reports directly to Sully and Dushane. She seems to lack the initial vision within most of the episodes of this series, but we'll come back to what I really think of what she's done with that. But in terms of initial vision, she doesn't really exhibit much, so we're going to give her a 1 out of 5. So the second quality is adaptability. So for anyone in a leadership position or those who want to create some kind of change, things often don't stay the same forever. So you need to be able to be adaptable. And this is a key characteristic of leaders. Jeff Bezos has often said that his management need to be able to look around corners, which means that they need to think about future trends and how they can future-proof their departments within Amazon. This is the mindset of somebody who is adaptable, not just adaptable in the moment, but can adapt to something which they can see happening further down the line. Now, in this instance, I'll give Dushane a 3 out of 5 because I think he realized that at some point he needed to exit the game and not be the drug dealer on the street. And later on in Top Boy's story, you could see that he wanted to evolve and think about the relationship he had with Shelly, played by Little Sims. And he could see that none of this was sustainable. It was affecting his physical health. His mother had just passed. It was becoming really difficult. So in terms of adaptability, there was an element where he wanted to adapt his entire life and pivot towards a new state of being. Sully, played by Kano, doesn't really show much adaptability throughout Top Boy. He's doing the same thing episode after episode. He's looking super stressed. He looks like the kind of guy that you wouldn't want to meet on a dark alley, but he seems to be going through the motions on each episode. He doesn't show much signs of adaptability or about thinking into the future. You could argue in the last season of Top Boy he did exhibit some of this, but overall across all seasons I'm going to give Sully a 2 out of 5 in terms of adaptability. Similarly, Jamie is simply repeating the blueprint which Dushane and Sully had set in front of him, and he just wanted to do the same thing as them, and he wasn't really showing any signs of being adaptable throughout. The reason I gave him a 2 and not necessarily a 1 is because the only essence of adaptability that Jamie showed throughout the seasons was the fact that he wanted to then collaborate with Dushane and Sully when he realized if you can't beat them, maybe you should join them. And then lastly, Jack, played by Jasmine Dobson, I have given her a 5 out of 5 in terms of adaptability, and her character is arguably one of the most complex because she is a black gay female within a male-dominated gang. So even though her sexuality is received well within the gang environment, you can also see that her love interest isn't part of that world. And she seems to have a well-paying corporate job, but Jack is still able to adapt and be in those environments, have those conversations, and be able to adapt back to immediately handling the crew, dealing with Dushane and Sully, being soft enough to be there for her sister and the newly born baby, have a new relationship and manage all of the complexities that come with her sexuality, her being a black woman. So there are a number of barriers in place. So she seems to be able to adapt really well throughout each one of the episodes. The third characteristic of a great leader is their ability to manage relationships. So whether that's their ability to deal with conflict, manage stakeholders, or look after their team, this is something that every leader can relate to. So with regards to Dushane, he had set up the entire team and he had managed them pretty well because they survived 5 seasons and he was able to keep them together. Even though that was done through a mechanism of fear, you could still see that he understood how each member of the team operated and he fed into whatever their strength and weakness was in order to motivate them. So Dushane gets a 4 out of 5 in terms of being able to deal with relationships. Sully, on the other hand, I'll give a 2 out of 5 when it comes to dealing with relationships, simply because in almost every instance, Sully deals with conflict in a very sharp way. He doesn't sit down and talk to anyone. He doesn't try to reason things out. Sully is the character which goes from 0 to 100 and always deals with conflict pretty badly. If we think about Jamie, on the other hand, I'm going to give him a 5 out of 5 when it comes to his ability to manage relationships. And this is because you can see that in his scenario, particularly in season 4, he is having to care for his 2 younger brothers, given the absence of both parents. He's not only having to play the role of a gang leader, he's having to play the role of a father, and you can see him quite articulately dealing with the teachers in the school. He's also having to then deal with the relationships that he's having with his enemies, who then become his business partners, Dushane and Sully. And you can see him starting to build relationships with the suppliers when he goes abroad. And he does all of this quite well, given the amount of balls that he has to juggle. He's a lot younger than Dushane and Sully, but he seems to have an innate skill when it comes to building and fostering good relationships. In line with that, I would say that Jack also does an extremely good job at managing relationships. So she has the relationships with Dushane and Sully, who she has to report to. She has the relationships with the team that she's managing, so the youngest who are on the block. You can see her developing a new relationship with a love interest. There's also the relationship she has with her sister, all of which are quite complex relationships, but Jack seems to have that ability and the emotional intelligence to know how to context switch between each one of those relationships to keep things going. And even though you can tell that it's quite stressful for her, she is managing to evolve as a character throughout each one of those episodes. And the fourth characteristic, which I think is almost the X factor for many leaders, is their ability to disrupt and be innovative. So when it comes to Dushane, he doesn't really do much which you could consider disruptive or innovative. So I've given him a 1 out of 5, and the reason I haven't given him a 0 out of 5 is because the one thing which he did do, which I thought was a little bit innovative, was putting his money into the summer house development, because he could see that as an exit strategy for an entrepreneur, that he needs to take his illegal money and to use it for some kind of commercial good or something which is more commercially viable than selling drugs. So in that way, in the mind of a drug dealer, I suppose that is quite disruptive because you're doing something completely different. You're taking some form of risk, and the innovation is that it's a regeneration project, which could very well go wrong. Sully, on the other hand, I will give a 5 out of 5 in terms of disruption and innovation, because even though I've talked about his frustration and him being kind of number 1 or 2 to Dushane, it gets to the point where Sully then says, no, I want to be the top boy. I am going to run things within this organization, and Dushane, you need to step back. So in terms of disruption, it doesn't get more disruptive than that. So if you're working with a business partner and things become really tense, but you don't want to dismantle the organization, there's only one of two things to do. Either you go or they go. And Sully saw this as his opportunity to take pole position when he could see that Dushane really wasn't about it anymore. He was suffering from issues with his own health, and that really he wanted to exit. So instead of letting the whole thing collapse, this was Sully's opportunity to try and become top boy. Jamie, I would give a 4 out of 5 in terms of innovation and disruption, because there was a point when he was abroad when he wanted to outdo Dushane and Sully. And he wanted to do this by creating a new deal, which I think was with a Turkish supplier. And he wanted to do things quite differently with his team, and at the same time protect his younger 2 brothers. So in doing so, he had to do something which was quite new, meaning he had to try and create a criminal organization, take over the incumbents whilst being a father. And that requires a lot of innovative thinking and a new way of doing things. Lastly, when we look at Jack Lawrence, she had an existential crisis in the last series of Top Boy when she realized through the death of her sister at the hands of the drugs which were served by one of her crew, that actually the entire premise of what they were doing was fundamentally flawed. And as this revelation grew within Jack, she did the one thing that you would never do if you were part of a drug dealing crew, which is try to leave. And not only did she try to leave, she scuppered the deal that they had, which was going to save them, because Dushane and Sully were in a bit of a pickle. And when the product arrived, which Dushane and Sully were going to sell to get themselves out of trouble, Jack intercepted it and put a pause on everything. Now, for her to do that is extremely disruptive, because not only is she disrupting what's happening within the organization, but she's disrupting her own thinking. And not only her own thinking, but she is trying to disrupt the thinking of the people that she's reporting to, Dushane and Sully, by telling them that what they are doing is wrong. And she is the only character at this level within the entire series and within all of the seasons that comes to this conclusion. There are other characters who obviously know that this whole drug dealing scenario is hurting the community, but she was the only one operational in that wanted to do what we would call a handbrake turn, do something which was completely different. And yes, this was triggered by a traumatic experience through the death of her sister, which she essentially saw as her own fault. But sometimes that isn't enough for people to make a change. And Jack wanted to do something new, and she had to do something drastic in order to try and create that change. So for that reason, she gets 5 out of 5 in terms of disruption and innovation. So if we add up all of the scores to reveal who I think the real top boy is, and we'll start from the bottom. So we have Sully in at 11.
You lose.
We have Dushane in at 13.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
Jamie in at 15.
Oh my God.
And by a nose, we have Jack at 16. So in conclusion, there were lots of different characteristics which I believe a leader should embody. And what was quite interesting for me is, as I reflected on Top Boy as a way in which to look at leadership and entrepreneurship, even I was surprised that Jack came out on top. But there was something about her as a character and the development of that character throughout each one of the seasons, which I think is missed when it comes to who really had the greatest evolution as an individual and as a leader throughout the entire drama. So who do you think the real Top Boy is? Do you still think it's Dushane? Do you think it's Sully? Jamie? What do you think of my thoughts around it being Jack? Leave comments in the description below, and if you want to see more content on business and entrepreneurship, do subscribe, like this video, and share it with somebody who you think might like it, and I'll catch you next time. Ultra and out.